supposed to be buried in here.
Missing bodies, moved headstones.
The dead do matter, and we need justice.
A city-owned cemetery being called a disaster.
Nothing. No ashes, no body, no grave, nothing.
Well, families say Gethsemane Cemetery took their money and then did some horrible things.
Like buried their loved ones together with people they didn't know, or lost their loved ones' bodies or headstones.
We need justice. The dead do matter.
Michelle DeBerry and her daughter say they're sick with grief.
He's supposed to be here. He's supposed to be buried in here.
Michelle's husband, Elvis DeBerry, died more than 3 years ago.
Now there's no trace of him at all.
Yes, just disappeared. Please, I want him to rest in peace. That man did so much for us. And I want the cemetery to own up to what y'all did wrong.
When our Local 4 investigative team showed up with her family recently to help find him, the cemetery kicked us out.
City-owned property.
Yeah, the city don't want y'all on the ground.
The City of Detroit's General Services Department, located inside this building, oversees Gethsemane Cemetery. We asked for an interview. No one was willing to talk on camera. Instead, they asked for a list of questions they would address at a later date. I'll get to that in a moment, but first I'll tell you, the families, they had plenty to say to us.
Mothers, fathers, grandparents, and children all buried at Gethsemane Cemetery. Their families spoke with our Local 4 investigative team, and all 25 families said they weren't sure their loved ones were actually buried where the cemetery said they were. A mother told us her son's grave was one place, his headstone was moved somewhere else. Another woman said her grandparents' headstones had been moved multiple times. And a man whose parents were buried at Gethsemane decades ago said their grave sites just vanished.
Almost all of the 25 families we spoke to told us there was one specific thing the cemetery would not let them do: watch as they buried their loved one.
So you don't see them actually putting your loved one in the ground.
It struck Shelley Calvert as strange that Gethsemane Cemetery wouldn't let her family watch as her mother was buried.
Did they say why?
That's just not their policy.
And weeks later, when Shelley went to the cemetery to visit her mom's gravesite, what she saw horrified her.
I took pictures.
A huge expanse of freshly dug up dirt, broken pieces of headstones, and grave markers just carelessly lying in the dirt. Grave markers are metal spikes cemeteries put in the ground when a body is buried to identify exactly who is buried and where. Shelley found them like this. She couldn't find her mother's grave marker.
And I had a really bad panic attack that day.
After complaining to cemetery management, Shelley says the next time she visited, her mother's grave marker had reappeared, but in a different place from where it was originally.
We've had hundreds of telephone calls.
A few years ago, attorney Mark Rossman started hearing about all the problems at Gethsemane Cemetery.
Bodies that couldn't be located from time to time.
Rossman filed a class action lawsuit in 2021 against the city of Detroit, which owns the cemetery, and several cemetery management companies the city contracted with over the years. Rossman got a close-up look at how the cemetery was managed.
We found that it was a complete disaster. There were outdated maps, outdated files.
Immediately after his class action lawsuit was filed in court, several of the city's cemetery management companies declared bankruptcy, which got them off the hook. And then a Wayne County judge, Sheila Gibson, gave the city immunity. So Gethsemane families can't sue the city, and again, the city owns the cemetery.
No problem with taking our money, and then you don't want to take accountability and responsibility for the actions that were done. That's not fair to us and our family members, and it's definitely not fair to my mother.
The family's pain, it hasn't gone away, it hasn't moved on, but I can tell you who has moved on. Some city employees who actually oversaw Gethsemane Cemetery were promoted and moved on up inside the city-county building. So, what does the city have to say? My investigation continues at 6. We follow the money trail. We have some receipts to disprove what the city says about one family's headstone, and we expose what kind of money these cemetery management companies were making at 6.